Welcome to The Brief and our series on startups, Out of the Pod. Join us as we talk to the founders and they take us through their journeys, sharing insights of the industries and sectors which they are disrupting. In today's episode, we will be talking to Manuj Khurana, founder of NewMo, as he tells us about the work his firm has been doing in the mobility and electric vehicle space, as well as what can be the impact of the widespread pandemic on businesses in India operating in the automotive sector. Hi Manuj, it is such a pleasure to have you with us today on our show. Thank you for joining us on this series of Out of the Pod. And when I really want to start with, is your background, particularly, the fact that you've been in consulting for a while. You've been with Invest India. If I'm right, you have also been with the World Business Council. And from all that I've seen, sustainability and working with sustainable practices, be it clean energy and then later with electric vehicles, all of it has been a very big part of your journey, which has accumulated into now your own venture, which I believe you started a couple of years ago. So, what has primarily been something that has kind of driven you? Because, like I said, I can see the fact that, sustainability is a very big aspect of your work. And now with mobility more specifically.
Sure. Thanks, Sean, for having me. I think it's part choice and part chance that why I'm doing NewMo and sustainable mobility now. It's really an amalgamation of everything I did before NewMo and what I want to contribute to in future. So I'll just try to unpack that for you. So I've been a career consultant for like 6-7 years. I was doing consulting across sectors: India, Middle East, US. But I really started my career in auto sector back in 2007 when after undergrad in mechanical engineering, I joined John Deere Tractors, and I used to be responsible for procurement back in the day. And I don't know, I didn't feel I belonged there, and I really quickly switched to consulting. But NewMo also is like a homecoming after 10 years and back to the space where I started in a different form though. But I think for me, the pivot to sustainability happened when I was working with Accenture Consulting, and Accenture used to have a team called Accenture Development Partnerships, which was really the goal of that team was to bring uh, consulting skills to development sector. So they would form teams of consultants who would work on projects in development sector. And I got lucky. I got a project on um, distributed solar in one of the villages in Rajasthan. And then that's when I realized maybe this is one space, sustainability or renewables at that point in time, I thought is one space where I want to contribute. So when I switched to Invest India after Accenture, I chose to be in renewables. I mean, at Invest India, your preference counted when you wanted to join a particular sector, and I chose renewables over 24 other sectors which were available. And then from there on, one thing led to another. Being part of renewables, I got exposed to electric vehicles as well, because a lot of companies on renewable power generation side were looking at charging infrastructure as a potential business opportunity. So I would say it was a combination of I was in the right place, I made some choices, and then I think but even at Invest India, I got a chance to start the electric vehicles team, because this was back in 2017 September, when there was a lot of noise about. I think that's when one of the ministers had mentioned that India will do 100% EVs by 2030. So there was a lot of noise. I got a chance to participate in the policy side of things, and but still back then as well, it was more about electric vehicles for me. I think the final pivot happened when I went to Israel in July 2018. I was selected as part of a smart mobility delegation by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel, and Israel, you might be aware, there's a lot of innovation happening on mobility. Mobileye, for example, which was bought by Intel in 2017, is an Israeli company which does a lot of development on advanced driver assistance systems and autonomous vehicles. I think that's when I realized, there's this entire shift which is happening in mobility, which is electric, connected, shared, autonomous, micro mobility, mobility as service. So there's a lot of stuff which is happening. And when I came back from Israel, I decided to start NewMo. NewMo basically is short form for new mobility, right? So it's really, as I said, a combination of things which I've done before NewMo and where I see I want to contribute.
So now the fact that since you were associated with the project in Israel, and after that when you started NewMo in India, you have seen the disparity, or let's not call it the disparity, the difference between how mobility is looked at in a country such as Israel, or basically let's look at the West essentially, and how it is in India. So the question is actually, did you see a disparity?
Actually, Israel was sort of a combination of East and West in that sense. Israel has similar challenges to us in the sense is a pretty small country, right? So they are short of space, right? So and they have around I think 350 cars per thousand people, which is much higher than us, right? So they have the problem we have of less space, and they also have the problem of the West, which is more cars per capita, right? So they are trying to solve for that at Israel level, right? But the unique thing about Israel is Israel doesn't manufacture vehicles. It's not really a manufacturing center, unlike us, right? It has of late become a very, I would say, busy development center. Right? Most, like I would say, every auto OEM of significance would have a R&D center in Israel, including like Mahindra, and I think Bharat Forge also has some investment. Right? So Israel was really eye-opening more from the perspective that while the challenges are common to, I would say, many countries, but at the same time, Israel's contribution on new tech development was extraordinary. Right, the kind of projects which were happening there, like yesterday only, one of the uh, founders I met. So during the visit, we were made to meet startup founders as well in Israel in mobility space, and one of the founders, Moshil, we still talk once a while. He had just sort of started a tech company which is developing cell technology which goes into manufacturing of cells, right? And yesterday only he messaged me that he's raised a $6 million round, and the company is doing well. We set up an office in London as well, right? So what I saw was extraordinary technology development in new mobility value chain, which we tend to sort of miss in India.
So, which actually brings me to this aspect that innovation at large, right? When we look at, and maybe the auto sector is also one of these areas, but R&D in general. I mean, when the whole push is happening on one hand to kind of make it a India manufacturing hub with the whole Make in India initiative and all the industrial policies, but the fact remains that we are more of an assembly economy. I mean, we will become a manufacturing economy essentially when R&D starts, when new innovation kind of happens. But it's because we were looking at EV as a space, and because it's a nascent industry in that sense, does EV bring to the table that kind of potential for disruption, be it innovation or otherwise?
Sure, I think because it's a new sector, there is a lot of room for innovation or for new firms to take shape. For example, like why am I doing NewMo? Like as I told you, I've not done enough auto in my life. Why am I the right person to start advising on, say, mobility? Right? Because it's a new space. There's space for new ideas. If you can think out of the box, if you can contribute, you're welcome, right? So I think the opportunity is there, but I think there are a lot of factors which sort of contribute to, I think, high tech startups. Not just, so I'm not talking about software startups only, hardware startups. One, I think, is really like all of these startups do need risk capital, right? We don't really have history of a lot of hardware startups. At least I'm not aware of a lot of hardware startups coming out of India, right? In recent, so long as I've been watching the space, let's say last 10 years, right? So there's not enough history. So I'm not sure if there's enough risk capital to support hardware startups. Also, I think it also is a function of the kind of money which goes into R&D investments at a country level, and this applies to not just mobility as a sector, but I think across sectors. Our per capita investments. I mean, we are a big country, so our per capita goes down for I think everything, but our per capita R&D investment is fairly low. Like Israel has, I think, among the highest in developed, or I would say not a developed, but more advanced economies. They have the highest R&D per capita. We don't have enough. In most countries, the contribution to R&D investments is higher by private sector. than government. But in India, it's government like which spends more on R&D. Right? So there's traditionally less investment in R&D. There's no or not enough history of hardware startups developing out of India. So it's a combination of things which is I'm not sure how easy it is to solve, right? So also uh, I think you have to look at there are two ways to develop technology, right? Do you develop it for local market or do you develop it for exports? Israel, for example, develops it for exports because there's nobody who's making a cell in Israel, or nor will anyone probably ever make a cell plant in Israel because the market is very small, right? So they do it for exports, and Israel generally is a very export-oriented country. Now, for us, because we have a big auto market, it's probably better, but it's also probably not. It has a negative side to it as well, right? So, for example, if I want to develop a technology which Moshil is developing, which is on current collectors, which are attached to say cells, right? No one is making cells in India. So who am I making this technology for? I have to make it for somebody who's not in India, right? So that I think typically the starting point for Indian hardware startups is domestic market, which also sort of limits what they are doing. So you will see, for example, I know you understand EV space fairly well. So you'll see a lot of companies doing BMS, a lot of companies doing battery packs in India, right? You will not hear a lot of companies doing cells or cell related technologies, right? So because they are, I think the starting point for them is really trying to cater to the local market, and that also sort of limits what they tend to end up doing.
Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned was regarding that there are a lot of startups in the space when we talk about technology from a software context, but when we talk about hardware, um, and like you said, there are concerns, or more than concerns, capital risk is a problem, right? When because we don't see a lot of hardware startups essentially, or companies doing innovation in terms of hardware. But my thought is that maybe another big concern, challenge that these companies face is from the dearth of certain raw materials when it comes to these newer technologies. I mean, if you look at EV and when you talk about batteries, uh, you know the rare earth elements, and this becomes kind of a concern when it comes to the development of batteries, and especially lithium ion. So maybe this is also one big contributing factor to why such kind of businesses haven't really picked up in India.
I think there are two sides to startups, right? One is startups which are developing new technology, right? Let's say somebody developing a new cell or a battery pack, right? And they are not really commercialized at scale, right? First, I'm saying there are not enough companies developing cells in India. Now, if you're developing battery packs, you don't need a lot of cells when you are in the product development stage, right? So you can still source. I know it's a challenge to source because you don't have local supply chain, but if you're in product development stage, you can still sort of make do with it. The bigger challenge is for companies which are more on application side, right? You are a scooter OEM or you're a battery pack OEM which buys cells from China and you assemble them into battery packs in India and then which goes into the vehicle, right? So for them, supply chain planning is important. They may have to have higher lead time. They may need to invest more in inventory holding. They may need to give cash in advance to get the products. I think that's a challenge which is which is which exists largely because we don't have local supply chain. It's not that the products are not available globally, and I think that also is going to affect. I think with the current pandemic, I think that pain will probably increase for Indian companies which source from other markets.
Actually, now that you're talking about the pandemic, especially in the context of this sector, and when it comes, with respect to import of certain commodities, parts, components for the assembly of electric vehicles, or even the entire automobile industry at large, given the fact that it's manufacturing, right, as a sector which is so heavily dependent on human capital, on the shop floor level. and the kind of impact that this the pandemic is having across this entire space, um, it's going to be, I mean, so there is a good and bad side to it. Personally, I mean, that's the way I look at it. The bad is obvious, right? There's going to be unemployment. There are going to be these large spells, consumer, because their incomes are going down, purchases will probably go down. A lot is going to get upset, which is a fact. But somewhere I also believe that, given the need of the hour, things will move. For example, when you talk about of manufacturing, things will move towards automation. Or when it comes to remote working, because a lot of people are now kind of adopting digital technology in that sense. It's kind of changing how businesses were run, is changing business processes, is changing a lot of mindset, right? I mean, like I said, I personally believe there is a good and a bad to the whole thing. And but I mean, I don't know. I want to know your thoughts on this, especially. I mean, there from an impact point of view, there will be some things which will be temporary, something which we will kind of find a makeshift solution to, but there will also be something that would be more long lasting in that sense. And there are certain sector parts of this whole sector, which will get kind of affected more than the others.
I think it's really hard to say. Okay, first I'll say in long term, I think the transition to electrification of vehicles is a secular growth story. There's no, it's an irreversible path which the industry will take. So I'm not worried at all in long term so far as electric vehicle adoption or production is concerned globally and in India. Having said that, in short term, I think as you already pointed out, I think the headwinds are there for every sector. I mean, nobody's spared, to be honest, right? Big or small. Maybe some specific sectors which are digital or completely online, which complete the entire transaction online. Like maybe the software we are using or Zoom. We hear a lot about Zoom these days, right? Slack. All these will do well, but that's a very small, I think, part of the bigger subset. Within auto obviously is impacted because of discretionary spending, manufacturing because of supply chains. You need people on the shop floor. All of that is, I think, negative, as you already pointed out. I think, but for EVs, also, I think I hate saying this, but I think EVs will probably face a little more headwinds in short term. Um, I think, and I'll just try to enumerate why I say that. One is, so let's say there is a, there's a sudden drop in growth, and government will try to do some things, right, for the different sectors. Like they'll probably try to give some short-term benefits, which could be, say, a lower GST, right? But in EVs, we already have a 5% GST. There's no scope to reduce it further, right? Zero, I don't think it will go to zero. So there's a lot of stuff which has happened for EVs. There's an income tax reduction. There's a FAME subsidy. So there's literally nothing which government can do anymore for EVs, right? For EVs, but for IC, for example, and I'm comparing IC to EV because as a consumer, when I go to market, I'll choose from one of these, right? But for IC, maybe government has still some scope. Maybe they'll reduce GST. I don't know. But they still have scope to do something against EVs where there's no scope left, right? So that's a little bit of a negative for the sector, I would say. Then I think because of the very nature of this pandemic, right? People are, I think, in near term. So everything I'm saying is for near term. In near term, people may not want to use shared mobility as much, right? Even in, say, buses, for example, there might be a need to sort of keep space between people till we really understand the the epidemiology of this COVID-19, right? So which impacts shared mobility in near term. And then in India, we've been talking about electric shared in the same breath, right? Because the entire story about electric vehicles are more expensive. You need to you sweat the asset and you use shared mobility, right? That story gets a little bit of a hit because of the very nature of this pandemic. Then I think the point we earlier talked about, the supply chains are outside India, right? So there's a little bit of a dependence on how China recovers, right? I mean, there is news they are recovering, but there's no guarantee that the COVID-19 cannot reoccur in China, right? So we being small buyers of the commodities in terms of volume versus say, Europe or some of the other countries, that could have some impact. So there is dependence on China as well when it comes to this sector. Also, because if you look at big OEMs, right, like Bajaj, TVS, Tata's, which had now finally started to, come out with products in electric vehicle space, right, they will also suffer badly on the IC side. So when they come out of this, it, what would they want to prioritize? Right? Would they want to prioritize EVs or would they want to again go back and see how they can, make more money on IC, right, or recover the losses on IC, right? So there's a bunch of factors.
Given how the pandemic is affecting existing business, the first priority, I mean, not just for the large OEMs or the existing incumbent big companies, but even for the government, I mean, pretty much will be to kind of one, mitigate as much loss as they can, and to protect these established companies. I mean, as of now, right now, they are they are the employers. The much smaller nascent EV segment is really not going to be on the radar, right? I mean, when you talk about large manufacturing setups, to protect those guys' jobs and employment at that level, as well as the kind of losses that that will happen to the economy if the bigger companies kind of suffer right now, will, I mean, obviously be the priority for the government, right? So, like you said, I think EV will not be their priority. But one of the aspects that you mentioned about,
What I'm saying is, sorry to cut you short. I think what I'm also saying is, even if there is limited scope for government now, they have done what they had to do for EVs, right? There's limited scope, but on IC side there is scope if they want to help, right? Right. So I'm not sure what will they do because they've not come out with anything yet. But there's limited scope, right? And the things I listed, which are specific to EVs, in terms of limited scope, in terms of dependence on China, in terms of shared mobility, being the driver of electrification in near term, being a large will likely be impacted, and also existing OEM which wanted to do both EVs and IC will probably, I think they can go both ways, but my sense is they will probably still prioritize IC. But I think the silver lining is, I think since you talked about good and bad, I think the good, I think, which is subtle, but I think very important is, I think this is probably the longest people have seen clean air and blue skies for an extended period of time, right?
without a doubt, without a doubt.
Yeah, people are feeling or experiencing what good air and blue sky feels like, right? So maybe I think I'm hoping that this memory sticks with people, and people are not just you and me, people also are who are running businesses. I hope this memory sticks, and this also becomes a part of their decision making, right? Maybe there will be some effort in personal lives to sort of start contributing to this, and electric vehicles obviously is a part of that. Had I think I would like I would be more comfortable saying EVs will not struggle had we had a regulation in place, right? Because today there's no regulation per se which forces sales of EVs. Like unlike in Europe, we know Europe is struggling badly as well with the pandemic, right? But there's a regulation this year that you have to have certain percentage of vehicles as EVs, and I think it's based on emissions, right? So they will have to sell. But here we don't have that as of now. So I think considering everything in short term, I see some pain, but I think in long term, the story is very clear. There's no doubt that EVs will happen.
So when you say long term, so right now at the EV, I mean, coming out of the pandemic, EVs are going to be at the brunt end of this. I mean, unfortunately, but it will so be the case. And yes, EVs are a long term thing in the sense that, and I really like the point that you mentioned. Hopefully, the positive impact that has kind of come out of the entire lockdown period is the fact that everything is nicer and cleaner right now. I mean, I am based out of the city of Gurgaon, and the fact that I can see stars in the night is a big deal. So that's how good the air is right now in Gurgaon. And I mean, but you, like you also said, I mean, EVs are a hopeful and potential future. But what is this time frame that we look at? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years?
So when I say long term, right? Let's say from 2021 onwards, only if we're saying only EVs will be allowed to be sold in India, right? Even then, even then, it will take 20 years because I'm assuming the average life of a vehicle on the road is 20 years. Maybe it's 15 years, but I'm saying 20 because in India, like, we don't really discard our vehicles, right?
So when you say 20 years, this is in context to the ICE vehicles that will be on the road.
Exactly, right? So if we want to have 100% EV fleet on roads, and we say from 2021 onwards only EVs are allowed, even then it will take 20 years. So long term is fairly long term, even with everything going its way. So we're talking about, when we say long term, we're talking about 30, 35 years in terms of 100% electrification of transport.
You also mentioned one more aspect about, I mean, coming out of the pandemic, particularly, there is, let's call it, a lot of risk aversion that's kind of going to be there with respect to public transport, right? And that might be one of the factors that will probably affect adoption of EV in that sense, mobility, e-mobility, shared mobility, uh, immediately coming out of the pandemic. Um, but a big surge that happened in EV over the past couple of years has largely happened in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler segment. I know that big part is also thanks to last mile logistics, yes, shared mobility in terms of three-wheelers, but there is also a different aspect to these same segments that EV can continue penetrating.
Let's say the time horizon talking about is, again, it really depends on when this is over, right? But in like in our memories right now, if you look at what's happening, forget EVs, what's happening with Uber in US, for example, right? Let's not even talk about India. The rides have stalled, right? They're more, like, they've halved, right? It's not, and that started to happen even before the lockdown. Like, US is not even completely locked down, and there's still parts which are open, right? So shared mobility in general is being eschewed because, again, of the nature of this, right? And even so, when I sort of extrapolate that to India, right, e-rickshaws also is shared mobility, people sharing vehicles. There's a bunch of startups in two-wheeler space which were promoting shared use of electric vehicles, like, or two-wheelers, and the plan was to transition to electric vehicles. Right? So we are just comparing 1 month back to near term, and I think between these two, it seems there is a little more which sort of goes against it, for against us, I would say, when we're part of the same space. But again, in long term, when I say long term, is once we are past this, once the transactions start growing again, obviously these companies will find ways. They are not going to sit idle and stop doing business. They'll find ways to uh, sort of give confidence to consumers that they have taken certain steps to still keep it, make it safe for them to use. So I think that will happen. But in near term, like next 3 to 6 months, which we're talking about, let's say next 6 months, it's going to be hard. Also on buses side, for example, right now the buses are not running. State transport units were buying these buses, right? So I don't know, like, they don't have money. So will they? I don't know. It depends on many factors, but my gut is, like, in near term we have to sort of brace ourselves, and I think keeping that in mind, we have to preserve cash. We have to be really economical in our spending, find ways to be more productive. All of that, which is true for every sector, but a lot, I think, all the more for our sector.
Particularly given the fact that it is human capital intensive one, and it's very high on capex, right? So these are issues that are going to persist. What do you feel is going to how is the post pandemic world going to look like?
I think a lot of, I was reading today, a lot of people are talking about building redundancy, right? That you need to have more backup, and it is showing, it's stemming from the healthcare and the supply chain side of things, that there's not enough ventilators because no one created backups. Right? I don't know. I think there's tendency, like during crisis, there's tendency to uh, start talking a lot about uh, what will change in future. I, I think it's going to be a function of how long it lasts. Like how much pain it causes, I think. So far, it has caused a lot of pain. If it continues like this, maybe a lot will change. And if it, I don't know, if somehow it goes away tomorrow, by magic. I think I don't know people. I don't know. Like it's a hard question to be honest. Right? What will change? But in near term, I can say like I mean, some of the things which I highlighted, like people will be more hygiene conscious, and obviously they will. Maybe I think if you ask me, there's like again all of this we are comparing to base case. Personal vehicle sales might go up. Like if they were going, if shared mobility was impacting that, it probably will. So the negative is discretionary spending will go down, but the positive is maybe people would want to buy personal vehicles and not use shared vehicles. Right? So it's a multitude of factors which are at play. So I would not hazard, how the world would change. But I think we have to come out of it soon. Actually, not really, because this is not really a zero sum game. Like, because what's happening is if for example, suppose the total sale of vehicles is 20 million in the country, right? And let's say the sale was supposed to be 20 million for next 10 years every year. If the EVs proportion continue to go up, then you can say it's a zero sum game. EVs are winning at the cost of IC. But what is happening right now is transactions are stalled. The 20 is going to 15 or 14. So it's a net loss, to be honest, in near term.
Okay, so before we go on a closing note, I want to ask you this. We've spoken about, I mean, the industry at large. We've kind of addressed, how the EV sector is, the possible impact that's going to kind of, come its way in the short term, and what it kind of needs to prepare in the long term. All of that, right? Um, so on a closing note, and this is a little more, I mean, it not necessarily is EV specific, it could be pretty much across companies or industries. And it's purely your opinion. What are the areas that companies, business owners, promoters, professionals, all of them, given this new world that may come about, um, let's go with the assumption that the pandemic does continue the devastating effect that it has, uh, what and where do they need to kind of prepare?
I think I can answer that question a little bit from my own experience, right? Like, so I was talking to a client last month, like literally a month back, right? We were talking about building the India team for them. Looking at India entry, we were talking about building the India team. The next call we had, we were talking about forgetting about it for a while, right? That is the speed with which this has hit us. I think as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, the focus is really to think long term, not get caught in like day to day negativity which exists at this moment, right? And also obviously start preserving cash, cut down on the cost wherever you can. For some people, it will mean people as well, people cost as well. Luckily, we are a small firm, we can manage, but for some people, it will mean cutting jobs as well because ultimately, like the revenues are going down, because of the leverage, the impact on profits is much higher. Companies which have cash on books, and a lot of big companies do have, I think they are better placed. I think honestly, I also think I think this is something which I missed saying earlier. I think this is a great style. If you're an early stage startup, which has recently raised capital or has some internal reserves, and you are in product development stage, this is a really good time. So if you are not going to hit the market for next 6 to 12 months, so it doesn't really affect your revenue side because you are not looking at revenue anyway, right? So you can still continue focusing on the product development. Maybe you'll get like really good talent at slightly lower prices as well. Because I think we will see the impact. We will see positions being cut, right? So I think it's a good time for early stage hardware or product development startup. Not a bad time, but otherwise, if you're a company which has high fixed costs, I think the entire focus will really be on figuring out how to optimize right size and think of new ways to make money. But yeah, it's really like it's unprecedented. Let's see how quickly and how lucky we are to come out of it with as little damage.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key to come out of this with as little damage. I mean, the damage is an inevitability. How much can we protect, going into the future? I think that's pretty much going to be paramount. So, Manoj, thank you so much for this. It was a brilliant conversation. I really appreciate you taking out the time. I know that you are not presently located at your residence. You're at your parents' place, despite the bad connectivity issues that we had. Thank you for coming back to it. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sean.